few weeks ago, I posted a video called "Why Are We Still a Nation?" I basically argued that the elements of consensus that held this republic together and have held it together for over 2.5 centuries have basically disappeared. They've all been destroyed. They've all been undercut. They've all been eliminated. Basically, the only things still holding this country together are habit and inertia. At least that's what I said. Since the election, I've begun to reconsider that video and what I said. And that's what I want to talk about in this second video. It's pretty clear to me, at least, that since the election, I've seen even more breakdown of consensus in this country. What little consensus existed is gone. And no matter how this election plays out, whether Biden is declared president or Trump somehow is declared reelected, the consensus is going to be shot. The people on the left won't take it if Trump is reelected. People on the right are going to be very unhappy if Biden replaces him. Neither side trusts the electoral system. That's a big problem. Neither side has a good opinion of Congress, and neither side trusts the court system in this country, the judicial branch. These are facts. Whether you're right or left, this is the reality. And at this point, in my view, there's no reason for this country to stay together. If you read the Declaration, and I beg you to read it and think about it, it's quite clear. The principles of the Declaration remain. Governments are formed by people to protect their rights, not to do the will of the majority. Rights come first. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and other rights. When any form of government, the Declaration says, any form of government, it doesn't have to be a tyrannical monarchy, it doesn't have to be a dictatorship. The Constitution is clear. When any form of government becomes destructive to those ends, the people have a right to replace it, to form a new government according to the lines that they want. Now, I would argue that there is no longer in existence an American people. There are two people. I think a simple way to look at the situation we're in is to imagine conjoined twins. At least that's what we call them today. When I was a kid, we called them something else, but that's derogatory and I guess probably racist. So we're talking about conjoined twins. And say they're conjoined at the hip. And for some reason, doesn't matter what the reason is, somewhere along the way, they have developed a distinct hatred for each other. Let's imagine, let's use the current political context. Imagine that one twin is a Trump supporter and the other twin is a Biden supporter. What do they do? If it was possible, medically, to divide them, to separate them, somehow, or should they be left together to kill each other? I mean, they're at the point, and if one kills the other, they're both going to die. I mean, in a sense, that's what we're like. You know, we're conjoined, the right and the left are conjoined in this country because we're in the same country, but we've developed a dislike for each other. Now, I don't mean to claim, I'm a conservative. I hate every liberal or every Democrat. That's certainly not true. But I hate what their party stands for today. And, quite frankly, they hate what I stand for today with my party and the president that I supported. Those are realities. I'm not judging one is right and the other is wrong, or one's better than the other. These are two distinct realities. We have our own realities. There's the reality of the people on the left. There's the reality of the people on the right. They totally disagree. And if you look at their beliefs, all those elements of consensus that used to exist no longer exist. There are elements of consensus within the left, and there are elements of consensus within the right. And that's why I would argue we are no longer one people. We are two people. And I'm not talking about, the old John Edwards crap or, the political discussion back then, are we, black and white America? I'm not talking about race or ethnicity. I'm talking about political ideas. I'm talking about culture. We are two people. And we're not going to get anywhere in this country until we recognize that. The right's not going to convince the left that they're wrong. The left isn't going to convince the right that they're wrong. The only way we could stick this country together and keep it there would be through violence, a civil war in which one side wins. And because the consensus is so divergent today, so non-existent, which it wasn't at the end of the Civil War, whichever side won would end up just massacring the other side. It wouldn't look like the American Civil War. It would look like the Spanish Civil War, the Russian Civil War, the Chinese Civil War. You lose, you die. You lose. If you survive, you're imprisoned. You lose, you're in a labor camp. That's where we're going to end up in this country, the way things are going. Because there's nothing else to hold us together. We are two distinct people with distinct political ideas, and we need to accept that and figure out, what do we do next? I talked about the Declaration. That brings us to the period of the American Revolution. We had an American Revolution, a war, because the consensus that had once existed between the colonies and Great Britain had collapsed. We had become intellectually, culturally, in many ways, two distinct peoples. This was something that was happening simultaneously. Americans were developing a different American character, and the British, the United Kingdom, was developing its own special character during the 1700s. They were growing apart. They were both moving in divergent directions. The consensus disappeared. The American political leadership understood that, and they kept addressing that. The problem was they kept addressing Parliament, and the reality was the problem was the king. But even right up until the end, even after the fighting started, we were sending messages to the king asking for some sort of diplomatic, negotiated resolution of these differences. The king rejected it. Parliament had rejected it. We were just declared in rebellion, and we had the American Revolution, which went on for 8 years. Ultimately, you look at the resolution of the war, the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the two sides did sit down and had to make decisions about what to do. And what they did was, of course, separate the two, political independence. But they had to work out, things like borders, the northern border, the western border, especially the northwestern border, which was a problem. And they had to worry about people. People don't realize just how many Americans moved during and after the American Revolution. If you look at the American Revolution, I know a lot of people think it wasn't very radical compared to, say, the French Revolution. But if you look at the percentage of people who fled the American colonies during and after the war, which in the French Revolution, if you fled France during the Revolution, you were considered an émigré. That's what historically we call them, émigrés. The émigré rate in France under the Jacobins was lower than it was in the American colonies and the United States during and after the American Revolution. But loyalists fled. Sometimes they were driven out. And in the peace in 1783, the negotiations with the British, we had to work those things out. How would they be compensated for the property they left behind, virtually all of which had been confiscated? All these things had to be resolved. Borders had to be resolved. It wasn't just, okay, you can be independent, sign here. It was much more complicated than that. They had to deal with all these issues. And the resolution of those issues actually drug on into the 1790s. It went on for at least another decade. That's what we need to do today, is to sit down left and right and figure out how we're going to split the country up. And I'm quite serious about this. If we don't do it, the same thing's going to happen as happened in 1775, 1776. Essentially, at some point, we'll start killing each other. And that's what I would hope we could avoid. But to do that, we have to talk about it now, not talk about how we're going to rule once our group's in power. We have to start talking about, have some sort of constitutional convention to split the country up and break it into two. And I mean that. I'd be very interested to hear in comments what you think about this. I know this isn't the standard fare that you see on YouTube or anywhere else for that matter, but I'm quite serious about this. I mean, I've been a historian my entire professional life, American historian. I study the period I taught to the period of the American Revolution and the early national period, right up to 1815. There is no consensus in this country. There's nothing to hold us together. We are no longer a people. We are two people at the minimum. And we need to start acting that way. We need to start talking to each other that way. We need to recognize that left and right to each other are foreigners. And it's time to take that into account and act accordingly. So let me know what you think in a comment. You like this video? Give it a thumbs up. If I have you screaming, give it a thumbs down. If you care to, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button so you know when I post new videos, share it with your friends, give it a whatever you want. Say something, leave me a comment. I'd like to know. I don't know if I'm losing my mind. Maybe it's just the election period. But in any event, always remember, stand firm, keep strong, stick to your ideals, and keep fighting.